everybody. Thanks so much for joining again. So today, having a really interesting conversation about sales enablement. Won't give too much away at this stage. We'll get into the conversation. But if this is the first time you're stopping by to watch this interview, basically what we're doing is going around and having conversations with lots of different people in lots of different parts of the sales organization to help you acquire new skills and advance your career. So today we're talking to Lisa about sales enablement, and we might digress into some other areas. So yeah, thanks for stopping by, Lisa. Maybe just give the listeners a quick introduction into yourself, maybe a bit about your background, the role that you're in now, and how that fits into the strategy at Ideals.
But first of all, thanks for having me, James. Hi to everyone. My name is Lisa Giusto, and I am the Sales Enablement Director at Ideals. Ideals is a VDR provider, which stands for Virtual Data Room, and it's a technology solution that supports deal makers and corporations in their due diligence needs and to safely secure their documentation. At Ideals, my team supports all sales teams from inside sales, field sales, and customer success in regular training and updates from product training, onboarding, and general sales skills development. Where I come from professionally, before joining Ideals, I was at Deal, which is one of the world's fastest growing startups, where I established the sales enablement function for the SDR, which was a team of 300 reps globally. Before that, I was at Amazon, where I worked within the advertising organization, supporting reps with all types of training from onboarding to upskilling. And before that, I had a number of different roles in technology companies and conference companies and event companies.
Well, I know, great. Thanks for stopping by. And I've taken plenty of notes, stuff that I want to get back into. Deal, obviously, I'd love to learn a little bit more because they exploded and there's this rocket ship that just continuously grows, doesn't seem to be slowing down. And as explosive as their growth has been, I think I've seen this explosion in sales enablement, especially over the last couple of years. Do you find that's because the market's getting a little bit tougher, so organizations are needing to do things slightly differently, so they're leaning on and building those enablement teams to help support that growth and kind of weather the storm?
I agree with that. I think the way I look at enablement as a function is very much connected to growth and change. So if particularly in tech, but not just exclusively to tech, any organization that's going through a phase of transformation and growth and wants to really empower their teams, their sales teams to go the extra mile, then an enablement function is needed. And I think that it's becoming more and more popular because it's a team that it was a function that is now able to really provide ROIs to what we're doing. And this is actually something that I'm really passionate about, to kind of really think about what are we doing, why are we doing it, what is the impact that we're delivering. And I think that the more as a function and as a community, we are able to really put a number to that, the more this function will continue to grow, expand in its importance within the companies, but also it will be more widespread across different industries.
Yeah, totally. And I think you play such a strategic role in that growth and change piece, right? It's almost like the glue kind of keeping everybody together in the right way. And I know I've been working with you guys on some training with the field sales team, and I can definitely see like the way that you think about things sometimes is different to how the traditional sales manager might, because you're looking at it from that growth and that change. You're thinking long term, like we need to see the adoption of this so that we drive change, where sometimes sales managers are like, hey, can you come in and do some training on discovery or medical, whatever, because they're trying to put like a plaster over something just to solve a quick problem. But that plaster is probably going to come off in 6 months and that problem's going to resurface and you have to go through that process again. So it's really interesting how you position that whole enablement piece. And you mentioned something earlier that's really interesting as well, and something I don't probably hear a lot of or see enough of, especially on like LinkedIn, is CS enablement. We talk a lot about let's enable our frontline sellers to go out and pick up the phone, book an appointment, and close a deal. But what about those CS guys that need to expand accounts? They need to renew accounts when, finance are putting pressure on customers and saying, hey, these are all of the tools we have. Like, how are you justifying us keeping those ones? We need to enable those people as well to go and defend existing customers. Otherwise, sales have got to sell twice as much if we're losing customers, right? And that's where that stress and everything comes in. So it's really interesting how you talk about CS, field, and inside sales, and making sure that they're all enabled to go out and hit that revenue goal, be it new logo or retention.
And I think every role in sales, and this applies to sales as much as customer success, there's always an operational part to that, and there's a sales part to that. And then I think one of the value that we can add is to talk to leaders and help think about these roles in components. So I'm very much, I've always said for a number of times, for a number of months and years actually, since working with SDRs, that I think the SDR role is 50% operational and 50% sales. So it's about how do I separate these components? Because learning to follow a particular workflow and being rigid around how I want that workflow to operate in order to deliver the success that I want to the numbers that I want, then what does that look like? And how can I ensure that this is clearly documented and clearly taught and clearly applied and clearly measured? And how do I then add to that component to the sales component? So if you look at this from this angle and you think of it into this different, as I call them, Lego pieces, then it's easy to think that you can apply this logic to the SDR role. You can apply this logic to the BDM or account executive role, and you can do that the same to customer success. So because there's an element of what they do which is operational, like from onboarding, for example, like this is what you do all the time in the same way. You follow step 1, step 2, step 3 of the same process. But then there's an element of engagement, relationship building, selling, maintaining the relationship and bringing them back from them walking away from us into maybe a different contract, or maybe just simply walking away because they don't perceive a need anymore. How do I keep that need? How do I keep that engagement? How do I understand their needs? This is a sales component. So teaching this and making sure that we're able to have a conversation about which one is priority. Do we want to engage them, make them happy today? Do we want to make sure they stay with us tomorrow?
Totally, 100%. And something I wrote down that you mentioned, like half operational, half selling. I couldn't agree more. If I had to go and build a sales organization again tomorrow and I had SDRs and AEs, or even if I didn't have SDRs, I just had full cycle AEs. One of the things I did in one of my VP roles is we actually outsourced. We basically got a bunch of VAs to do account qualification. So rather than like SDRs or AEs spending time building lists and doing all of that, I read in a Salesforce report recently that reps spend 70% of their time on non-selling activities. And actually, if we enable those people to spend more time selling, they don't need a load of new tools and stuff or increase headcount. We just need to make the sellers we've got more effective. Yeah, we outsourced some of the account selection and like account hypotheses piece so that when reps executed in the CRM, they could see, okay, the reason I'm reaching out to these accounts is for these reasons. I didn't have to spend any time inside a Zoom Info or Lusher or whatever database tool, collecting that information, then doing the research, then executing. And it had a massive impact on opportunity creation and things like that. And reps had a bit more fun, focus on execution, not doing admin. And no real seller really likes sales admin, right? So it's look at those little marginal gains, 1% and 2%, and how do I give that back to the rep?
Yeah, and I think to that, I'll just add what, and I can bring my experience at Deal here. When I first joined Deal, we didn't have any enablement. There were no documentation on processes. So the situation was that this team was doing things in this way, and this other team was doing things in this other way. And everything made sense in the context of their own reality. But how do you scale this? One of the first things I did when I joined Deal was to actually say, okay, let's create just of our processes as a first one. Let's agree on that. What does prospecting look like, and what are the activities that you do within prospecting? Let's document that and put them in order, and then look at the step by step, like actually through the tools. And does it make sense having it? Are we skipping important passages because we just want to move fast? Are we perhaps doing a little bit of clunky movement between one tool to another? Is there a way that we can think of how we can simplify this? And I think what came up from that exercise was actually that we didn't have hygiene in certain areas. So we had to educate reps of make sure that you check whether somebody else is maybe already engaging with this lead before you start and putting anyone into a sequence. And it's like, it might just feel like it's just adding to your time, but think about the customer experience. And I think if you keep that as primary in mind, you think, okay, first I need to think about my customer. So how does this workflow support that experience in the most positive way? And then I had to think in terms of what is right for the organization in a way that I can scale this so that every single rep can follow this and be efficient at doing that. And then I think about what is right for the individual seller. How can I help them be more effective? Ultimately, I understand that in the example of having to go through the CRM to check for previous engagement may potentially be a bother on the single lead. Think about if somebody else was to do that to your lead, then you're just about to close the deal. So you have to think in terms of what is the right thing to do. And actually, it took me a little bit of time to make sure that I had all the input necessary to get everything laid out. But once it was laid out, then we had something that we can actually educate the team from the moment they came in to be really effective at what they're doing. And then scale it across the rest of our organization.
Yeah, totally. And if we're talking about scale, right? So we need to think long and hard about that process. Otherwise, if we let go of that control, we've got 10 people running 10 different sales processes, and it's very hard to scale that because half of them might be working out really well and the other half don't. But if I need to scale headcount, I want to be able to almost clone my best reps. And if I've got that playbook, if I've got that dotted line to success, hey, if we follow this process, we'll win. If we don't, we'll lose. Yes, we want to leave some room for creativity in there, but we want to give them the guidelines and the framework and say, this is how Ideals successfully acquires new customers and the right customers so that we don't churn them in the first 6 months and then have this repeat cycle. You'll be successful. And if you don't, you won't. I think that's a really strong place to start. And you don't need to go and invest in loads of expensive tech to do this. Like I used to do it in things like Notion. I still use Notion to this day, or different tools that you have internally just for documenting stuff and just make it really easy for people to access. I was on a call the other day, and I'm on calls all of the time and this comes up, but more recently we were talking about enabling champions and what content and resources we can use. And someone's like, hey, I've got this idea, but we don't have anything. And someone's like, yeah, we do. It's in the hub. But they're like, where's that? So it's
Yeah.
just making sure that the stuff is readily available. It's almost in their back pocket. And they can pull it out in that moment. They've got one shot. They need to use it when it matters, not after the call when the customers then started to think maybe this person isn't the right person to really be spending my time with because know this stuff, right? So it's just making that information accessible all the time.
It is. It's super important. I don't think that I've seen the perfect solution to that yet, also from a technology perspective. But I think that having, first of all, a workflow and the way you want your reps to operate documented clearly and simply in a way that is not process driven, but it's workflow driven. And that makes a difference in the sense that, say, for example, I'm looking at the process for, I don't know, engaging with particular leads, or I'm looking at how do I demo, for example, as a process, and you have to follow these instructions. If that is isolated from what actually happens just before or just after or at the same time as doing that specific process, then the rep will have to join the dots or that order and create the puzzle in their hands. And when you just give people a puzzle that is scattered in different pieces, and then effectively you're asking them to put the pieces together for themselves, because nobody can operate with a number of different scattered information that they need to follow. They need to compartmentalize it in their hands, and they need to create an order. And if you don't create that order for them, then everybody will have their own order, which means they will follow these individual asks, but they might have their own way of interpreting how to do that in connection with one another. So it's important to, yes, have this information available, have it also in a way that they can see the story. And I think we all know the importance of storytelling. It's storytelling in your own hand around, okay, I can now remember things because it was laid out to me in a way that I can logically see it and tell myself that story. So I think this is a very important component of that. And I think for me, and what I keep pushing my team to think is, it has to be simple. It has to be visually simple. Visually, people have to remember it. And then we need to be very specific on the little things, but also be really, oh, do you get the big picture before we get into the specificities of every single step of that process?
Yeah, totally. I've seen some playbooks or some like just PDFs, and it's just like paragraphs and paragraphs of text, and it's no one's. Maybe 10 years ago, maybe somebody would have gone through it, but now where we've got these like social platforms and it's like images and videos and things like that, we have to make it engaging for the sellers. Otherwise, they're just going to go, that just feels like too much work and I'm under pressure and I'm behind where I need to be. So it's that classic. If you went and I know me anyway, if I went and did my driving test again tomorrow, I'd definitely fail because I've picked up bad habits and there might be a better way of me doing it. But I know that way and it's easier for me to continue doing it that way. It might not be right, but if it was a really easy way for me to consume that information, maybe I would change. So it's just got to be easy for reps. And if it's not easy for the reps, then they're not going to make it easy for your customer. And as sellers, our job is to make it really easy for our customer to buy and solve their problem and advance their organization. And I think that's usually where a lot of reps drop the ball is that complexity piece. They pass on to their customer and surprise, we see deals stall out, they ghost, they slip, they end in close loss when they could have gone into close one if we just made it a little bit easier for them to buy from us and drive consensus in their
Mhm.
company. We spoke a lot about like process and things there. Let's talk about another area, so like training and development. So I know that you're really big on this, and I know your team are as well. I see a lot of one and done training out there. It's sales kickoff. We bring in some motivational speaker or somebody does half an hour on medic, massive framework, 30-minute session, and then that's it for the year. And we give an increased target to the reps with no reinforcement and wonder why we look at our Salesforce or HubSpot dashboards and everything's not going up and to the right. Like how important to you and your team and then to the managers and to the sellers is not just training, but continuous training, ongoing coaching, development to help increase performance?
Very important. We know that learning is about reading, is about hearing, is about doing, is about repeating that until you start to build your own mastery of things and eventually turns into a habit. And once it turns into a habit, then you know that you're doing it with your eyes closed, like driving. The first time you jump in a car, it's a little bit slow and then you might not do very much. You might make some mistakes. And then by continuously doing it, you get tips, you build confidence, you learn from your own practice how to start maybe going a little bit faster, how to be a bit more attentive to the things. Experience tells you that you should look left and right a couple of times before getting into the lane. So you learn these things, and if you just read them, you haven't learned them because you haven't done them. So sales is the same. It has to be a component of you understanding why and learning it by somebody telling you, or you doing your own reading and your own discovery. And then you applying that and thinking what works for you. And sometimes you can be really fast at picking it up because it works for you. Maybe we're being particularly good at laying out the content, the material that actually allows you to just get going with it very quick. Or sometimes you just have to try a little bit and then see how things work for you and learn from maybe your own mistakes. Obviously, practicing outside of customer conversations is ideal if you can. So if you have the opportunity to role play in it, then amazing. But also sometimes you do actually build that confidence in real life situations. But I think it's always safe to have a safe space where you can fail and learn and practice and get back on your feet. So I very much support the idea of reinforcement and continual reinforcement. And ultimately, when it comes to it, is one of the questions you may ask is, to what extent do you do this and when is enough? And I think that's where I think a larger theory around the learning comes in, which is the relationship between input and output. Output is always where your organization wants to get. And you can put an output in terms of revenue, you can put an output in terms of behavioral goals you want to achieve, but it can even be like, as a rep, I just want to get promoted, right? I want to go from SDR to AE, or I want to get promoted to manager, or I'll get promoted to maybe enterprise levels. How do I do that? So you set your own goals. So that's the output you want to achieve. Then what is the input that I need to do? And how much practice and reinforcement and learning and bettering myself do I need to do? And how do I learn this, that I'm going the right route in terms of, is this giving me the output in terms of sales success that I want to achieve, but also in terms of sales behaviors acquired that are leading to that success and that I can see and measure for myself. So I think it's the discipline from an individual seller to think, I have to think in terms of output as, yes, selling more, but selling more doesn't always translate into I'm ready for that promotion, because you might not have acquired the skill set to do it. So yes, look at your results, because you can make a relationship between the input you're putting into improving yourself and the output that it gives you on the revenues that you achieve and the targets that you're able to get to. But that sometimes you can just be lucky. So you have to take out the like element out of it and things like, just because I've been able to close 2 very big deals doesn't mean that I can do this consistently. So it's that consistency that comes into play. If you are building that consistency into your processes and into your sales techniques as an input level, then you can expect that this consistency at the output level, and then you'll be able to close more and more deals of that. And it removes that luck element. And then if you happen to be a lucky person, then good for you. But if you're not, then you create a safety net for yourself.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I could talk about this topic all day long, and yeah, I'll take it to my grave that there's nothing more transformational for the sales organization than training and continuously reinforcing that training through refresher sessions, workshops, coaching, that kind of stuff. I think it's so important. And actually, at my last org, I implemented a tool called WorkRamp, which basically helped me like centralize all learning content, and then they could actually practice. So for it to scale, I didn't have to jump onto a call with every single rep every single day. I could just say, here's a piece of content. Now hit record and you're going to pitch it. Maybe it's an objection handle because we're doing a lot of cold calling this day, or maybe it's a new challenger statement that I'm rolling out across this persona. They would then hit record. It would come to me and I would approve it, or I'd kick it back and say, hey, Lisa, really good job. Love this part. I think this piece just needs to be a little bit tied to here. Can you give it another go? And I was getting them certified. That's kind of part of what I do now, and why I call a lot of the programs ready at the end, like prospecting ready or discovery ready, is getting reps actually ready to go out and do that. And that talks to a piece that you mentioned earlier around confidence. What reps are terrified to make a cold call. They really dread going into that first discovery call or demo. They don't look forward to that negotiation call because they haven't got the skills. The skills build confidence, right? And you can tell the difference between a rep that's got skills and hasn't, because you can just feel this like aura around them. They're confident. They know that they're not going to win everything, but they know they can go in there and hold their own in that conversation. And if it doesn't go their way, that's life, that's sales. We're not gonna win them all. So that's spot on. And then you mentioned something earlier as well, like the how. Unfortunately, I see a lot of training or a lot of content out there about what we all know what to do. We know we need to do more coaching. We know we need to make more cold calls. We know we need to, be better storytellers in our demos to implicate the pain on our customers. Nobody talks about how do we actually do it? How do our reps actually pick up the phone and make a really great cold call? And you've probably seen that over your tenure as well, over all these different roles. We talk a really good game about what we should be doing, but can someone point at me and show me where the how and the why? How are we inspiring these reps, and how we put in these talk tracks, these templates, these skills in their back pocket so they can go and execute a great sales process?
Yeah, I think that's a critical component as well. Like, how do you get there? What are the actual things I need to do? And I think, again, it comes back to thinking of sales as a process. You can be creative, you can build your own flair to that. And I think um, this is where you can bring your personality, you can adjust whatever talk track, whatever training, whatever input, whatever role play to what works for you. But actually, one of the things that I've learned is when I see a good sales rep, what I've also learned about the way that they operate is that they always follow the same process. They don't invent themselves every conversation. They always start in a certain way, the stage 2 of the conversation of engagement is always consistent, and then the outcome is always consistent. So it's like, what are the essence of that process that sometimes can be unique to individuals, because we are different people. We do engage with others in different ways, and what works for one person doesn't work for another. So as an enablement team, we can give you the tools, we can give you the process, we can give you the content, we can give you feedback and coaching and all of that as an input level. And then the output, there has to be a mix of all of that that transforms into each individual reps thinking, okay, this works for me, and I'm going to utilize this piece here and this piece there, and I'm going to create that flow that works for me, and I will repeat that. So it goes back to that scalability of process, or always the same approach that works, scaled across a different situation, different customers, different situations generally, and then what works for one person. And that's sometimes we talk about, okay, we have a great person, a person that does it really well. Let's scale it across the organization. You can, to some extent. And I think it's about distilling the essence of how they're doing it and see, okay, what is actually within what this person does that is scalable. Not all of it will be, because a lot of it is that creative part that belongs to each individual person. But the scalable component is the essence that you can say, okay, this is stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and this is what they are doing. And that goes back to having documented workflows so that you can then teach a scale. That is teachable, that is scalable, that is documentable, and then take that and make it your own. And I think that is what ultimately works the best that I have seen.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. And look, I don't want to go too deep on this topic, but I know we've been doing some work together with the team there. Talk to me about your opinion on bringing external people in, because sometimes, I mean, for both of my VP roles, I brought like solutions or like trainers in to do specific stuff with the team, because there's only so many hours a day and still selling as well at the same time as managing a team. And I didn't want them to go without. So I've got no problem bringing people in. I do, when I speak to some people, I get this sense of I'll do it myself and I'll do like maybe 10% of the job because I'm worried about saying, hey, can we bring someone external in to do this? What's your opinion? And imagine you're speaking to an audience that's maybe not got big structure. They've got one enablement person. They're in their very first job starting out, but they've got big demands coming from the org. What's your opinion on bringing external people in?
I think in the particular situation you say, and I've seen this, I've been there, what tends to happen is that if you have one person just doing everything, what tends to happen is that they will end up working into the urgent and important quadrant, or it will be like what is important operationally. For example, sales skills are important. They're critical for sales success. We know that. But also they are the skill sets that take the longest to deliver results. So when it comes to improving whatever goals or achieving whatever objective you have, you tend to look at maybe 3 months, max 6 months time frame. You want to see results. What's going to deliver results? I'm talking about objection handling for 6 months, and then looking at how this is going to deliver that result. Now, if you have one person, you're going to put them on, can you please onboard my people? Can you please train them on how to use this tool? We not just change the process. Can you just let them know? Can you just train them on doing this? Or can you create this piece of documentation? And then what happens is that's where you end up spending all your time. And then what is actually really that sales leaders care about, because that's what they are. They're not asking you, please, can you go on board these people? They take this, it becomes like part of what enablement does. So it's not an ask. What they ask is, can you please help my team be more effective here? Can you help them close more deals? Can you help them move opportunities down the funnel? They're getting all stuck. They're not able to negotiate. This is what's important for sales. But you're going to, oh, sorry, we're just launching this new improvement to the workflow. We just creating all the enablement for that, and that's critical for the organization. So that's the conversation. And then you created this joint conversation where you really want to help, you're trying to help, but because this is long-term planning and long-term results, you actually can't do it. You can't prioritize it over, and you shouldn't. And I think that's why engaging someone external can be a couple of advantages. One is they're able to look at it from external viewpoint. It's been able to actually have a conversation to say, like, is actually the way that we're doing things, how does this scale versus what you're seeing in other organizations? Because sometimes when you are inside, it's difficult to be really objective and to really know in a scale of 1 to 10, where are we trending? How heavy do we need to go in training? What changes do we need to make? Or what decisions do we need to make in order to achieve the goal that we have? And having that come in almost as a consultant that can provide that input and advice, I think is very invaluable. And then on top of that, you're thinking, sometimes you think, okay, this is how should do things, and you trust your own sound of your own voice. So having the ability to say, oh, actually, that part I didn't know, and that part I didn't know, and this makes total sense to me because I'm not always able to compare what I think is right with a lot of other voices and a lot of other organizations. So bringing that perspective in, I think, has been really invaluable in engaging with you.
Yeah, totally. And I think sometimes, especially with smaller teams, there's like these two ways of looking at it. One minute you're working in the business and then you're working on the business. Or another way of looking at it is you're trying to be transformational but start being transactional. I hear that all of the time. And what I'm basically saying is you spend so much time in the weeds doing the job because you've got all these people asking you all these things. You're just getting paperwork off your desk, but you're not actually getting to the stuff deep enough, which is going to have a strategic, like transformational impact on the business, right? So that's the beauty and why I'm passionate, like you said, with what you're doing, with what I'm doing, is I can come in and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing across these segments, and this is what seems to be working in 2024, which we weren't talking about in 2021. And this is what these guys are doing at SDR level to increase this, and this is what A's are doing to, increase urgency here, that kind of stuff. And I think you get that benefit, right, of getting access to someone who's got their ear really close to the ground in lots of different environments and can wrap that through. And also, at the end of the day, and you hit the nail on the head, like we're here to get a job done, which is to hit the number. And if that means I need to bring somebody in to help us do that, there's nothing wrong with it. And I just see, unfortunately, so many sales leaders that they're almost like, I'm worried what people might think about me internally if I do that. It's like people just want to hit the number, right? As long as you've got good cost justification and you're bringing the right person in, it's going to work. Bring someone in, let them help you out and help you move that business forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think ultimately it's not about justifying your own existence. It's about making sure that you help an organization getting to where the organization needs to get to in the fastest way possible.
Yeah. So for your time, Lisa, thanks so much so far. I've got two kind of closing questions I think are going to be useful for listeners that are like getting into that journey that you went into when you first started out in sales enablement. Is there any like resources, books, podcasts, courses, thought leaders you'd recommend that people getting into it can go and grab a coffee of or follow on LinkedIn or go and subscribe to on YouTube?
Oh gosh, a number. I'm very. I wouldn't say I'm very structured on that. I like to get a number of different voices. I follow a number of different people on LinkedIn that have the ability to share snippets of what works for them from a sales perspective, which I find really good. Too many to name, but when it comes to learning, I tend to be an old school learner, so I'm very much books driven. So I trust I need to take time off and think of being able to read, being able to think about connecting the dots and then taking my thoughts away. Okay, how can I apply this? And what does that? So a couple of books that I found where you have put them here. So one is this. It's Design for How People Learn by Julie Dirksen. And this is a book that's extremely easy to read, very funny as well. It basically helps you think in terms of how do I structure an enablement strategy around learners, and how do I get to know my learners and work backwards from the learner. So I think it's very learner centric. And another book that I think has influenced me a lot is obviously Atomic Habits. It's extremely useful in a number of things. I think the logic behind this, if you haven't read it, is to think in terms of breaking down small habits into your day-to-day so that you can progressively improve towards almost learning to do things mechanically. And once you do that, then you've acquired a new skill. So thinking of this not just in terms of how you sell, but everyday things is extremely helpful to trying to get to achieve any goals you set yourself. So I say, yeah, these two.
Amazing. My top tip for when anyone that's listening reading a book, I used to read the book from front to back and then not really do much with it. What I do now, which drives my partner insane, is I read a chapter, I bend the page over, and I go and put it into practice, or I go and implement it, or I go and try it out. And then I read the next chapter or the next couple of pages, and then I go again. Otherwise, we actually just go through this process of reading all these great books and not actually doing anything with them. So as an impact, we just could have probably spent that time doing something completely else because we'll never actually see it come into practice. So top tip there. And interesting, I've never read that book about designing how people learn, but one of the things I found fascinating when I got into sales leadership is I started to learn, like you said there, about the way different people like to consume information. Like some people, some learning styles people have is they like to talk it out, right? Talk about a topic and they want to have a open conversation and talk it through, and that's how they learn. And there's some other people that are just like, hey, James, just, I get it. Leave that slide up. Just want to write a couple of things down and process it in my head. And then we can have that conversation. And again, we can't just run cookie cutter stuff internally. We need to understand, like, reps at an intimate level. How does this person like to consume information? How do they like to be given feedback? How often? All of this kind of stuff. And I think that's where a lot of people unfortunately miss the mark, is they just do this kind of cookie cutter catch-all kind of process, and they feel like they're doing a lot of good stuff, but they're doing that stuff to the wrong audience. And it's about, like, I want to say segmentation because I think we all use that word far too much, but like segmenting your sales org into buckets of how they like to learn and what's skill gaps they have, and then running programs specifically to that and for their context. Otherwise, it'd be like, why are you talking to me about cold calling? Like I can put meetings on the calendar all day cold calling. I just can't figure out how to build a business case and justify our proposal.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
I
where we
think
just have
the word segmentation is absolutely fine, I think, to use in this context, because you have to be able to segment the different type of learners and the different types, the different ways people learn, the different strategies you need to employ to achieve whatever outcome you're looking to achieve. And I think the book has got quite a number of call outs that when you read it, it's very intuitive. You think, oh, of course, but then you hadn't thought about it. And that's why I liked it, because it's really validated things that were just obvious. And now I know it rationally versus know it just and not thinking about it. So I make sure that I apply the learning from the book into the strategies that we put together in your business.
And that's the power of reinforcement, right? Sometimes the stuff I cover with people is I already know that. And I'm like, cool. So how come when we listen to the call, we don't see that appear in the conversation? They're like, I just completely forgot to do it. And that's okay. Like, we're trying to layer advanced skills on top of people. And sometimes we just drop the ball on the basics. And let's just reinforce that stuff so that people go, so my conversion rate from stage 2 to 3 could be because I've just stopped doing this. Do we agree that this is the right thing to do? Absolutely. Cool. Let's build a coaching plan around that to make sure that comes back into the way that we operate or into our sales conversations. We've got one last question, really, so again, aimed at the audience that maybe just getting into enablement for the first time. Best bit of advice you could give them if they're starting today, their first day, best bit of advice you give them on their sales enablement journey?
I would say get to know your sellers, get to know your customers, and understand what works and what doesn't work within the sales process. So I think it's first to think in terms of component, to learn to separate sales into operational and creative selling, and then see what all the things that we have that I can see, what goes in one bucket and what goes in the other bucket. And then listen to the way they sell, the way they communicate with customers, listen to customers to understand what the customers want and how do we engage them in this conversation. Do I see that we are understanding them? And then walk backwards from there. Okay, map that into a way that is simple for you to explain to a 5-year-old. Like, our buyers buy from us because there's got to be 3, 4 reasons. These are the pain points we help them solve. Do we have this in sales conversations? If not, that's your starting point. And then the other starting point is look at how they're selling. Are they fast? Are they following a process that makes sense from a customer perspective, from an organizational perspective, and from a sales velocity perspective? And then if you see that, oh, this doesn't quite work, and I don't understand why we're doing this, or why is this missing, then map this down, because that might be another area where you might need to start from. So I think working across these 2 main areas is where you can actually start to really identify where you can deliver impact, and then start working for the one that is most priority for the business.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. And I'd also add, aligned with the operational piece, like leverage data, right? Otherwise, you're just left with like people's emotions and opinions. And as much as we might not like what the data looks like, and I don't mean analysis paralysis, we don't need 7 tabs on a spreadsheet with 1,000 rows, because no one can make sense of that data, but just a couple of reports on a dashboard that tell a story and say, hey, we're really strong here. We're not very strong here. This is what we believe the root cause to be. Let's do something about wrapping a solution around that, and then tracking the impact it's having. People might not like how bad that looks, but again, it's the reality, and we'll all start to feel a bit better knowing, okay, this is a big thing that we need to solve for. At least we know what we're focused on, and it might take us 3, 6 months, to your point earlier, but when we get to that point, that should no longer appear on that dashboard, and we might be welcomed by another problem, and that's business, right? The market economy, everything changes. But again, we're using a data-driven process where we're taking emotion and opinion out, and we're just relying on the fact. So
I agree. I think having data feed into the strategy is critical. You want to know how successful your idea as a strategy is until you're actually able to tie up with some data. And sometimes it's about going beyond the numbers. I like numbers. I like data, and I like to see what is behind the data. So if, say, our conversion is, I don't know, whatever percent, then what does that mean? Is this good? And why is it good, or why is it not good? And trying to go, as I said, the root cause behind that, but also what does it mean in terms of what I can do about it? And it goes back to, is this a problem that fits on a lack of maybe skill set, a lack of knowledge? Is this a lack of process, a lack of process adherence? Is it, where does that tie up? So again, I have my input strategy, which is compartmentalized into different components. And I'm tying up with that data that tells me, okay, these are the numbers that I see, these are the results we've achieved so far. And then when I see this and I go beyond the data, then I'm able to see, okay, that tells me what I need to do and what I need to start from.
100%. Feel like I could talk about this all day long. Such a interesting topic, such an important topic, but I'm pretty sure you've got a life outside of this interview with me. So we'll call it there. I hope it was valuable for the listeners. Lisa, thanks so much for hanging out. If anyone wants to go and follow Lisa on LinkedIn, I'd recommend you do that. I know she does a lot in the community, so definitely go and check her out. And this will be on YouTube and LinkedIn at some point soon. So yeah, thanks so much for sticking with us all the way to the end. 51 minutes, nearly 52 minutes, Lisa. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, James, and thanks for listening. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.